After Toussaint Louverture had defeated the last remaining British soldiers that were on Haitian soil, the British retreated. The 40,000 troops that they had committed to the taking of the island of Haiti were thoroughly defeated by Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and the rest of the natives of Haiti, with, of course, the help of the King of Israel, the help of the Creator of heaven and earth himself. And so, after having defeated the French, the British, and then throwing out the Spanish, Toussaint Louverture published a constitution in 1801, declaring that slavery be abolished on the island forever. Toussaint Louverture, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Haiti and its governor-general, had ties in France. His children were studying in France. In fact, he very much wanted Haiti to remain a part of the French Empire. And when the government of France wrote to Toussaint to inform him that slavery would indeed remain abolished, Toussaint was excited. He wanted Haiti to have close ties with France. He wanted that relationship to grow the same way that a newly created United States of America was slowly reestablishing ties to Great Britain along friendly terms. And so, when Toussaint Louverture got a letter from the First Consul, from Napoleon Bonaparte himself, ensuring this to be the case, he was excited. He wanted to relinquish command of Haiti back over to France. But what happened next surprised him. Napoleon Bonaparte put together a vast armament. Over 25,000 soldiers and a great number of warships, and sent them to Haiti to retake Haiti. At first, Toussaint Louverture wasn't sure what to make of it. But as he looked around, the French warships began to go into the various ports to devastate the population and to reestablish control. Even during all of this, Toussaint Louverture held steadfast his belief that France had noble intentions. He thought that perhaps the generals of those ships were acting on their own. After all, he had a letter from Napoleon himself saying that slavery will be abolished, saying that France loves and respects what Haiti did in defeating the British, in throwing the Spanish off of the other half of the island. Toussaint Louverture made every effort to communicate to Leclerc and Rochambeau, the commanding generals. He made every effort to communicate to Leclerc his intentions to give up Haiti over to France peacefully. But what he did not know is that there were to be no peace. What he did not know is that the French army was under orders from Napoleon and the French government to exterminate every man, woman, and child of color on the island of Haiti and replace the population with Frenchmen. This is the plan that the French government came up with. This was their policy. This is what they discussed in their chambers. And this policy of extermination was now fully underway. And Toussaint Louverture could not understand. Let's read Jean-Jacques Dessalines' proclamation of April 28th, 1804. Let's try and figure out why Dessalines did what he did when he threw out the French out of the island after the war was over. Toussaint Louverture behaved as a noble gentleman. Toussaint Louverture was very honorable. He treated all of his prisoners of war with dignity and with respect, and never did he engage in any of the atrocities that the French and the Spanish and the British continually perpetrated in the islands that they controlled. To help us out, let's read from the annual register first. The annual register, or a view of the history, politics, and literature for the year, records and analyzes all of the year's major events, commits it to paper for you and I to read today. This, what we're about to read, was written no later than 1804. And so, from the annual register of 1803, we read on page 330. Our attention is next forcibly drawn to the events which occurred in the New World in the course of the present year. Those with which we shall commence our narrative as most interesting and certainly most important are the transactions of the French force in Hispaniola, the triumph of Bonaparte's general-in-chief Leclerc, and of his vast armament in Saint Domingo was not of long duration. The cruelty and deceitfulness which were exercised towards all the unfortunate Negroes who had submitted, and particularly to their gallant leader Toussaint Louverture, was more than sufficient to rouse the deepest resentment in their bosoms. Although the sufferings of hero, or the injustice offered to an illustrious individual, usually engages more of the attention of the world than is excited by multiplied acts of cruelty exercised in secret and an obscure person, yet in the colony of Saint Domingo, even the barbarous act of seizing upon Toussaint after he had surrendered and sending him to France to be made away with in cold blood was lost among the frequent and atrocious acts of horror committed by the French upon the unresisting Negroes. Frequently were the latter, when barely suspected of being likely to rebel, forced into vessels, the captains of which were instructed to throw them overboard when they go out to sea. Other ships were fitted up on a new construction for the purpose of their destruction. When a considerable number of these unfortunate beings were stowed in the hold, the hatches were closed, sulfur burned below, the fumes of which in short time occasioned suffocation. Those were acts that the French not only committed in the face of the world, but openly avowed. They even spoke of such transactions with their accustomed levity and gaiety. And to the mode of sending the Negroes out to sea, to be thus destroyed, they gave the appellation of déportés en mer, or to transport into the sea. Tortures of the most cruel nature, burning their unhappy victims at a slow fire, and every other act of relentless barbarity were daily and hourly practiced by the French armies and government. Dessalines and other of the black generals who afterwards broke out into open insurrection declared, and probably with truth, that the French generals had the unblushing audacity to propose to them gravely the extermination of the actual population of Saint Domingo, in order to populate it anew with natives of France. The idea of exterminating 500,000 of men, women, and children appeared to those professional destroyers as merely a common act of policy. And they supposed that the black generals who had submitted to their arms could be bribed by military rank and emolument to concur in the horrid scheme. It will not be matter of surprise, then, that Dessalines, Christophe, and the other generals who were obliged to listen to such a proposal should feel the most inveterate hatred against these polished ruffians, who, pretending to superior civilization, were not ashamed to perpetrate proposed acts that the most untutored savage would shrink with horror from. Although the indignation of every Negro in the island must have been aroused at such a proposition, policy obliged them for a season to still their emotion and conceal their feelings. When, however, the time was come which allowed them to express their sentiments, they appear to have been still more aggrieved at the hypocritical cant of the French writers than even by the cruelty of their soldiers. These writers certainly possessed an admirable art of glossing over the foulest actions, which they sometimes describe with a gaiety that turned the mind from a due consideration of their atrocity, and again treated in the language and affection of sentiment and sympathy. French gaiety or French sentiment, however, little tended to assuage the miseries of this unfortunate island. Whether the hyena laughed or the crocodile wept, the unhappy victims were equally doomed to suffer. Those who survived had the additional affliction of hearing all kinds of calumnies thrown out in their polished language against the living and the dead. Ferocious Africans and horrible barbarians were the terms constantly applied to the individuals of the black population of the island, which the French had resolved to exterminate. This was written by a European in 1803, 1804. Let's read what some of the natives were saying. Let's read what Henry Christophe, the general of Haiti, one of the main generals, had to say about the French. One of the revolution's generals, Henry Christophe, recounted the brutality of the French. Have they not hung men with heads downward, drowned them in sacks, crucified them on planks, buried them alive, crushed them in mortars? Have they not forced them to eat shit? And having flayed them with the lash, have they not cast them alive to be devoured by worms, or unto anthills, or lashed them to stakes in the swamp to be devoured by mosquitoes? Have they not thrown them into boiling cauldrons of cane syrup? Have they not put men and women inside barrels studded with spikes and rolled them down mountainsides into the abyss? Have they not consigned these miserable blacks to man-eating dogs until the latter, sated by human flesh, left the mangled victims to be finished off with bayonet and poniard? From Henri Christophe. Now, we can understand why Jean-Jacques Dessalines took the decision that he did. That the French had to be thrown out of the island violently, if necessary, in order to preserve the liberty of the natives, the liberty of the people who were living on the island. Let's read Dessalines' explanation through a proclamation that he gave in 1804. Proclamation by Dessalines as Governor General of the island, dated at the Cape, April 28th, 1804. First year of independence. Crimes the most atrocious, such as were until then unheard of and would cause nature to shudder, have been perpetrated. The measure was overheaped. At length, the hour of vengeance has arrived, and the implacable enemies of the rights of man have suffered the punishment due to their crimes. My arm, raised over their heads, has too long delayed to strike. At that signal which the justice of the Creator has urged, your hands, righteously armed, have brought the axe upon the ancient tree of slavery and prejudices. In vain had time, and more especially the infernal politics of Europeans, surrounded it with triple brass. But you have stripped it of its armor. You have placed it upon your heart, that you may become, like your natural enemies, cruel and merciless, like an overflowing mighty torrent that tears down all opposition. Your vengeful fury has carried away everything in its impetuous course. Thus perish all tyrants over innocence, all oppressors of mankind. What then? Bent many ages under an iron oak, the sport of the passions of men, or their injustice, and of the caprices of fortune? Mutilated victims of the cupidity of white Frenchmen. After having fattened with our toils these insatiate bloodsuckers, with a patience and resignation unexampled, we should again have seen that sacrilegious horde making an attempt upon our destruction, without any distinction of sex or age. And we, men without energy, of no virtue, of no delicate sensibility, should not we have plunged in their breast the dagger of desperation? Where is that vile Haitian, so unworthy of his regeneration, who thinks he has not accomplished the decrees of the eternal by exterminating these bloodthirsty tigers. If there be one, let him fly. Indignant nature discards him from our bosoms. Let him hide his shame far from hence. The air we breathe is not suited to his gross organs. It is the pure air of liberty, august and triumphant. Yes, we have rendered to these true cannibals war for war, crime for crime, outrage for outrage. Yes, I have saved my country. I have avenged America. The avowal I make of it in the face of earth and heaven constitutes my pride and my glory. Of what consequence to me is the opinion which contemporary and future generations will pronounce upon my conduct? I have performed my duty. I enjoy my own approbation. For me, that is sufficient. But what do I say? The preservation of my unfortunate brothers, the testimony of my own conscience, are not my only recompense. I have seen two classes of men, born to cherish, assist, and succor one another, mixed in the world and blended together, crying for vengeance and disputing the honor of the first blow. Blacks and yellows, whom the refined duplicity of Europeans has for a long time endeavored to divide. You, who are now consolidated and make but one family, without doubt it was necessary that our perfect reconciliation should be sealed with the blood of your butchers. Similar calamities have hung over your proscribed heads. A similar ardor to strike your enemies has signalized you. The like fate is reserved for you, and the like interest must therefore render you forever one, indivisible, and inseparable. Maintain that precious concord, that happy harmony amongst yourselves. It is the pledge of your happiness, your salvation, and your success. It is the secret of being invincible. Is it necessary, in order to strengthen these ties, to recall to your remembrance the catalogue of atrocities committed against our species? The massacre of the entire population of this island, meditated in the silence and sang-froid of the cabinet. The execution of that abominable project, to me unblushingly proposed, and already begun by the French, with the calmness and serenity of a countenance accustomed to similar crimes. Guadeloupe, pillaged and destroyed, its ruins still reeking with the blood of the children, women, and old men put to the sword. Pelagi, himself the victim of their craftiness, after having basely betrayed his country and his brothers. The brave and immortal Delgrès, blown into the air with the fort which he defended, rather than accept their offered chains. Magnanimous warrior, that noble death, far from enfeebling our courage, serves only to rouse within us the determination of avenging or of following thee. Shall I again recall to your memory the plots lately framed at Jérémie. The terrible explosion which was to be the result, notwithstanding the generous pardon granted to these incorrigible beings at the expulsion of the French army. The deplorable fate of our departed brothers in Europe, and dread harbinger of death, the frightful despotism exercised at Martinique. Unfortunate people of Martinique, could I but fly to your assistance and break your fetters. Alas, an insurmountable barrier separates us. Perhaps a spark from the same fire which inflames us will alight into your bosom. Perhaps at the sound of this commotion, suddenly awaken from your lethargy, with arms in your hands, you will reclaim your sacred and imprescriptible rights. After the terrible examples which I have just given, that sooner or later divine justice will unchain on earth some mighty winds above the weakness of the vulgar for the destruction and terror of the wicked. Tremble, tyrants, usurpers, scourges of the new world. Our daggers are sharpened. Your punishment is ready. 60,000 men, equipped, inured to war, obedient to my orders, burn to offer a new sacrifice to the names of their assassinated brothers. Let that nation come who may be mad and daring enough to attack me. Already at its approach, the irritated genius of Ahiti, arising out of the bosom of the ocean, appears. His menacing aspect throws the waves into commotion and excites tempests, and with his mighty hand disperses ships or dashes them in pieces. To his formidable voice, the laws of nature pay obedience. Diseases, plague, famine, conflagration, poison are his constant attendants. But why calculate on the assistance of the climate and of the elements? Have I forgot that I commanded a people of no common caste, brought up in adversity, whose audacious daring frowns at obstacles and increases by dangers? Let them come, then, these homicidal cohorts. I wait for them with firmness and with a steady eye. I abandon to them freely the seashore and the places where cities have existed. But woe to those who may approach too near the mountains. It were better for them that the sea received them into its profound abyss than to be devoured by the anger of the children of Haiti. War to death to tyrants. This is my motto. Liberty, independence, this is our rallying cry. Generals, officers, soldiers, a little unlike him who has preceded me, the ex-general Toussaint, I have been faithful to the promise which I made to you when I took up arms against tyranny. And whilst the last spark of life remains in me, I shall keep my oath. Never again shall a colonist or a European set his foot upon this territory with the title of master or proprietor. This resolution shall henceforward form the fundamental basis of our Constitution. Should other chiefs after me by pursuing a conduct diametrically opposite to mine, dig their own graves and those of their own species, you will have to accuse only the laws of destiny, which shall have taken me away from the happiness and welfare of my fellow citizens. May my successors follow the path I shall have traced out for them. It is the system best adapted for consolidating their power. It is the highest homage that I can render to my memory, as it is derogatory to my character and to my dignity to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. A handful of whites, commendable by the religion they have always professed, and who have besides taken the oath to live with us in the woods, have experienced my clemency. I order that the sword respect them and that they be unmolested. I recommend anew an order to all the generals of departments to grant succors, encouragement, and protection to all neutral and friendly nations who may wish to establish commercial relations in this island. And there we have it. Dessalines, through a proclamation, explained in detail all of the atrocities of the French. And he explained that the French government, through their generals, proposed to him personally that he should help them exterminate every man, woman, and child of color, black and mulatto alike, on the island, in order to repopulate the island with natives of France. They asked Dessalines, Henri Christophe, and other generals of Haiti to their face to help them murder everybody on the island, all of their brothers and sisters, all of their family. You can imagine why Dessalines felt in the end that the only way that he can secure the liberty of the island is to throw the French out. He even went so far as to kill all of the French who had not already left the island. It was kill or be killed. The plan, the policy of the French government was extermination. Complete and total extermination of an entire nation. That's what the Spanish had tried to do 200 years earlier. That's what the British did and other European countries have done in the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, and everywhere that they have went to all over the world in the last 500 years. A policy of extermination, annihilation of entire populations, of entire nations. Many nations no longer exist today that existed 500 years ago. In fact, there was well over 1,000 nations of natives in the Americas when the Europeans got here. Where are they today? Exterminated. What is the policy today? The policy is the same as it has always been. Extermination. That is their plan for most of the races of the world, for most of the other populations, most of the other families of the world. And this policy has already begun anew in Haiti. The earthquake itself was an attack, and it killed over 300,000 people in one day. The policy is the same: extermination. And yet, even though we read that Dessalines wrote, we have rendered to these true cannibals war for war, crime for crime, outrage for outrage. And Dessalines had said that he would put to death anyone born French who still lives on the island. Dessalines could not bring himself to match the barbarity of the French. Dessalines granted clemency to a lot of French citizens. In fact, he wrote in the same speech, "It is derogatory to my character and my dignity to punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty." And so, unlike the French, unlike the Europeans who have no regard whatsoever for life, Dessalines could not bring himself to match their level of atrocities. And in the Constitution of 1805, we read in Article 12 that no white man of whatever nation he may be shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor, neither shall he in the future acquire any property therein. However, Article 13 reads, Article 12 does not affect white women who have been naturalized Haitians by the government, nor does it extend to children already born, or that may be born of the said woman. Article 12 also does not affect the Germans and Polanders who are naturalized Haitians. Napoleon had sent all of Europe to retake Haiti and to exterminate the population. Swiss soldiers, German soldiers, Polish soldiers. But some of these soldiers, when they got to Haiti, they realized that they were on the wrong side. They realized that they were sent by tyrants, and they chose to be on the side of liberty. Dessalines recognized that, and he gave them clemency and permitted no harm to be done to those Germans, those Poles, and the Frenchmen who had helped the cause of freedom. And so Dessalines did not do as the Europeans did. He did not punish the innocent along with the guilty. Hell-bent on world domination, conquest, and destruction, Napoleon would eventually send 80,000 European soldiers to retake Haiti and exterminate the population. 73,000 soldiers would fall dead on Haitian soil, never to rise again, never to return home. Contrast that with Dessalines, who we read in the Constitution of 1805 wrote, "No person is worthy of being a Haitian who is not a good father, good son, a good husband, and most importantly, a good soldier." Fathers and mothers are not permitted to disinherit their children. Article 14. The head of state is the father of the family of Haiti. There should not be any distinction of color, within the family. Starting today, we consider all Haitians to be black. Everybody was considered to be part of the same family. When you go out to fill out an application, there is no question that asks you what color that you are, what race that you're from. In the Constitution of Haiti, everybody is the same. In a later proclamation that Dessalines made in May of 1804, he extended an olive branch to the Spanish. We read, "Receive here the sacred promise which I make, not to do anything against your personal safety or your interest, if you seize upon the occasion to show yourselves worthy of being admitted among the children of Haiti." Dessalines was about family. Dessalines was about paying obedience to the laws of the one true creator of heaven and earth. The actions that were taken by Dessalines and the people of Haiti was in direct response to European policy, to European racial cleansing. It was a direct response to Europe trying to exterminate the population of all of the islands of the Caribbean, at least the ones under French control. And sure enough, the rest of the colonies would have followed her lead. Dessalines also tells us that this policy of extermination had already begun. He mentioned Guadeloupe. He mentioned Martinique. The French were already in those islands and they were exterminating the native population in accordance with the policy of the French government, the policy of the French people, who held their silence, who did not intervene to do anything to stop what their leaders were doing. According to Dessalines, this policy of extermination had already begun. They were killing natives, killing human beings, killing our brothers, our sisters indiscriminately, without any regard to sex, to age, whether or not you're sick, whether or not you're in the belly. They don't care. They did not care. They still don't care today. The policy was being carried out. Dessalines had to stop them. And with the help of the creator of heaven and earth, that's exactly what happened. The Father intervened to prevent these horrors. The Creator intervened to put an end to this onslaught of perpetual carnage that Europe had unleashed upon the world. And the Father used Haiti to stop Europe. And what are they doing? What are the Europeans doing in Haiti today and in the rest of the islands? They are slowly replacing the native population with Europeans. The policy has not changed. Unless we open our eyes and study what their fathers did, we will not comprehend what their children are doing to us today. The policy is the same. They want to remove the natives from the Caribbean islands and repopulate it with Europeans and with elites. And they don't care how they do it. They don't care how many people die. They don't care. They want the islands, and they want the native population exterminated, gone.